Welcome to the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Hosted by John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hi, this is Dave.
And this is John.
And welcome to episode 16 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today we'll be interviewing Jonathan Coulton. He's a singer-songwriter. Sings about a lot of cool, geeky topics, such as being a programmer and zombies and being a evil mad scientist in the future and stuff like that. If you're not familiar with his music, you should definitely go check it out. I think it's all available for free online. That's one of the things he did to rise to fame. Is just he actually released a song for free online every week, and built up a following that way. So that's really interesting too, and we'll be talking to him about that. He also wrote some of the music for Valve Software for Portal. And then stick around after the interview when John and I will be talking about music for geeks and being a geek listening to music and stuff like that.
All right, let's get Jonathan on the phone.
Hello.
Hi, this is Dave and John from Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hey, how are you guys?
Good. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So first of all, what sort of geeky interests did you have growing up?
I was always into video games and computers. I remember my dad coming home with Pong, that first home edition of Pong. And, from there I had every console that came out up until now. So that's been pretty consistent. And that was the sort of sidetrack of that was computers in general. I learned to write BASIC on a Radio Shack TRS-80. I had a Commodore 64 and, that whole line of stuff. So that's really the main things for me.
Did you make robots or something like that?
Not when I was a kid, no. That came later in life as an adult.
Okay.
But yeah, for a while I was building hobby robots from kits and that sort of thing.
In addition to the video games, did you read a lot of science fiction and fantasy or anything like that, or? Yeah,
I remember I had a subscription to Omni magazine that I was very into. I collected all the issues for a while. I'm sure they're gone now, but yeah, and I loved all these insane short stories in that magazine. But yeah, I was always into Heinlein and Bradbury and the classics. But yeah, I was definitely into sci-fi and just science and technology in general.
So how bad was your old job as a programmer, and would you encourage all programmers to give that up and become rock stars instead?
I certainly like my job as a rock star better than I like my job as a programmer, but that said, it was not that bad a job. People hear the song Code Monkey and assume that it's this sort of direct biographical story, and it's, I would say, loosely based on my experiences at that job. So, it was really not terrible at all. There were lovely people that I worked with, and, I enjoyed the work. I still like writing code. The only terrible thing about any job is the clients. If you could just sit in the privacy of your own brain and do work on whatever it is you're working on, I think that would be quite pleasurable for most people. But the fact is, you always have some sort of a client that you need to please, and they're always wrong about what they want, and it's a little frustrating. But aside from that, it was really not a bad job at all. It was one of the reasons I stayed there for almost 10 years.
So what prompted you to try releasing songs for free on the internet, and how long did it take for them to sort of start catching on?
Well, it was the end of 2005, and I was leaving my day job to do music full-time, and I wasn't being employed to do that. So, I suddenly had all this free time on my hands, and it seemed to make sense that I should pretend that it was my job to make music. So that's what I did. Every week I would put out a new song, and I sort of hoped that I would attract some attention that way, and it worked. Over the course of the first few months, I had a couple of songs that kind of hit, and people were talking about them and sending their friends to the website. And I would say by the middle of the year, I wasn't making significant money selling the songs that I was putting up there, but I was definitely making some money. And it sort of gave me the impression that if I kept going, it would continue to get bigger. And indeed, it really has done that. So by the end of that year, I had discovered that there were actual physical audiences that would show up to shows that I did in various cities. So I had started touring, and I put all those songs on CDs, and so it really worked even better than I expected.
And you sort of do this thing, right, where you say that you'll show up if a certain number of people will promise that they'll be there?
Yeah, there's a website called eventful.com that I've used for a long time, where people can demand to have a Jonathan Coulton concert in their city, and then I can look at all the cities and see which ones have the most number of people. That has become, I will say, it was really useful to me when I was first starting out because I didn't know anything about any city. And so it was really handy to be able to look at, Seattle and see, oh my God, there's 100 people want to come see a Jonathan Coulton show. So, if I charge this much per ticket and it costs me this much for my plane ticket and I stay with friends, I can make this much profit. So that was really crucial when I was first starting out touring. It still comes in handy, but less so because, now I've been around the country so much that I have a full year's worth of cities that I can go to. It'll take me a year to get back to all of them based on the touring schedule that I like to do. And so, it's become less important to me to open up new places to play in because there are already so many. But that said, it's very handy if, we're going to be, I discover I'm going to be in Pittsburgh one night and Columbus the next, and I can sort of look geographically and say what's near there and how many people are signed up there, and so it still does come in handy.
So you've written songs about two of my favorite things, mad scientists and zombies. Which of those two things do you think are more likely to destroy the world?
Probably mad scientists, because zombies are not real. That would be my guess anyway. Mad scientists are certainly real. There are a lot of them. They're very angry.
What's the most likely scenario, you think? Like, how would a mad scientist destroy the world in real life?
Probably it's going to be some sort of nuclear situation, some sort of atomic thing out of control. And I'm not talking about giant ants, because that's not a real thing. But, some sort of explosive device, some sort of radiation. I think that could cause a lot of problems.
So speaking of mad scientists, are you familiar with DrHorribles' SingAlong blog? And if so, what did you think of it?
I sure am. I thought it was fantastic. I'm a big fan of most of the people involved, and was even before they made it. So, on top of that, it was great to see a bunch of people getting together and making stuff without any large media corporation involved, and to have it still be so great and polished and high quality, and to have it reach so many people, even though it was, it wasn't backed by a Hollywood studio and it didn't appear on a television network. It was, granted there's some significant money behind it, but, it's really, to me, it was very heartening to see a bunch of people just create a thing, put it out there, and have it succeed.
So do you have a zombie contingency plan yourself?
Do I have the what?
Do you have a zombie contingency plan yourself?
No, I really don't think I have much chance if there's any sort of zombie apocalypse. I haven't spent a lot of time shooting guns, and I just don't have a lot of survival skills. I can't run very fast. I'm probably overweight and out of shape. My contingency plan is to go quickly.
Yeah.
So do you think a guitar would be as good a weapon against zombies as it is in Left 4 Dead 2?
No. I don't think you could inflict a lot of damage on a zombie with a guitar in real life.
Have you tried just hitting people with a guitar and you're like, it doesn't work that well?
Yeah, if you just hit a regular person, you got to hit them a few times before they go down. They're not even as angry as a zombie is.
And plus the guitar would probably break eventually, so, doesn't seem like it would be too bad.
Yeah, you don't want to ruin a guitar.
Okay, so how did you end up working with Valve to do the music for Portal?
Well, I was doing a show in Seattle, and some people came up to me after the show and introduced themselves and said that they worked at Valve, and had I ever considered writing music for video games? And I said, well, sure, and I was a big fan of Valve because of Half-Life, and so we arranged to have a meeting in the future, as people do, and I went to their offices, and they showed me around, and I got to play an early version of Portal and talk to a few of the writers and people working on the game. And, over the course of talking about a number of different things that we could do together, it became clear pretty quickly that the best intersection of our skills and interests was probably Portal, and specifically the character GLaDOS, who is, the same kind of passive-aggressive, monster that I'm always writing about in music. So, I'd like most people, I was immediately drawn to her character. It's just so well written and interesting.
So what do you think about the way your songs are presented in Rock Band? Does the difficulty seem about right, or?
Well, they're all pretty easy. Many people remark on how easy they are. And in fact, they are also relatively easy to play in real life, because I'm not a particularly, I don't have a lot of technical prowess when it comes to the guitar. I'm a strummer more than anything else. So there's very little shredding in my songs, and I'm always a little nervous when it comes time to record the guitar solo, because it's not my core competency. So I'm not surprised that they ended up being pretty easy. But, the nice thing about Rock Band is, for, I would say, most people who play Rock Band, it doesn't need to be hard to be fun. In many ways, it's about playing the song in a musical way, in addition to it being about playing the game. So, hopefully people won't mind so much. Who knows? Maybe I need to write a really difficult song specifically to put into Rock Band so I can get my cred back.
Rock Band recently released this Rock Band developer kit so that artists and labels can sort of put their own songs into Rock Band, and you have a couple songs out in there too. So what was that like? Were you involved with that directly, or how did that work?
Yeah, I did not do the authoring myself, although they have made the tools readily available and pretty easy to use. So, really anybody could do it if you have the time, and, you need to know a little bit about MIDI and a little bit about music and a little bit about, I would say more about Rock Band and, how it is played and what the different difficulty levels mean and all that. But, I looked at the process and I was like, there's a part of me that would really love to do this myself, but also I just don't have the time, and I know if I try to do it myself, I will never ever get it done. So, luckily there are a number of companies that have sprung up to provide offering services to artists, and, I worked with a few of them for the first round of songs, and everybody's sort of trying it out and figuring out how the whole thing works, and so there was, during the open beta process, there were a lot of authoring teams floating around and working on different songs. But, from my perspective, it was pretty easy. I gave people the stems, the individual tracks, and they made it into a game. So it was pretty easy for me.
So are there any video games that don't feature music by you that are worth playing?
No, I don't think so. I like games a lot. Truth be told, I haven't had time to really play as many big-time console games as I used to. It's just with the two kids and a family sharing a TV, it's hard to find that time to really sit down and dig into a long story with 40 levels and 10 bosses, So I've really been playing a lot of iPhone games and a lot more casual gaming in my life than there used to be, just because it's much easier to fit in. That said, I'll say a few games that I've been really impressed by. I loved Braid for the Xbox. Just a really cool game. Such interesting mechanisms. It's a puzzle game, but surprisingly complex and mind-blowing. And just beautiful. The design of it is just a very pretty game. What else? I've been playing Osmos on the Mac. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but you're a one-celled organism kind of floating around trying to eat other one-celled organisms. And it's a pretty simple premise, but there are a couple of mechanisms that make it really fun to play. And again, great soundtrack and such a nice look to it. Marble Blast Ultra, that's been the big Xbox game for me. I like to go into the online Xbox Live area and get my ass kicked by a bunch of 13-year-olds. And it's always remarkable to me that they can move the marble around as fast as they are moving it. I feel like some of them have got to be cheating because it looks impossible what they're doing.
So are there other musicians who sing about the sorts of things that you do, and do you wish that there were more people doing that kind of thing?
Not necessarily. I mean, sure, there's plenty of musicians who sing about geeky stuff. I mean, more and more, or maybe it's just they're more and more noticeable. There's, if you like the rapping, there's always MC Frontalot, who is hilarious and very talented musically, I think. And, when I think about my influences, They Might Be Giants have been writing this kind of music for 20 years or more, 30 years, and they're huge influences on me, and they continue to be, and Weird Al Yankovic too. He's, I suppose, most well known for the parody songs that he does, but he has quite a few original songs, and I think a lot of them are pretty great. When I was a kid, I listened to Nature Trail to Hell in 3D over and over again, and mostly for the original songs that were on there. Not to mention he's a fantastic accordion player, which I think will serve anyone well.
So, a lot of your songs have a really strong storytelling structure to them. Do you have any interest in, writing prose fiction or anything like that?
No, because it seems too hard. It seems like too much work. I have ideas when I'm writing songs, but I feel like I really only have enough ideas to support a 3.5-minute song. The idea of writing something that is as long as a book or even a short story sort of gives me the willies. That all that sitting down and type it. I don't know. It seems like, I don't know that I would be able to hold my interest for long enough to be able to do that. I mean, that's the thing about creating something, is it's really only good when you get in that zone where you are working on something and you forget about everything else, and you forget to eat, and you forget to go to the bathroom, and you just want to sit there and keep making the thing that you're making. And I really only have that when I'm working on music. I have it when I'm writing things, but only for about a paragraph at a time, and then I got to get up and do something else.
Our podcast is hosted by Tor.com, and there was a story on Tor.com recently by Cory Doctorow called "The Things That Make Me Weak and Strange Get Engineered Away." I was just wondering if you had heard of that.
He let me know he was doing that, and I was thrilled. I guess I first heard of Cory through Boing Boing, and from that his fiction, which I think is great. I love the kinds of things he writes about. To me, it feels like a very modern kind of science fiction. It's about the future that we imagine now, as opposed to the future that we've been imagining all these years. And it turns out those two things are pretty different. And yeah, he's a great guy, and I think a very smart person. And so yeah, I was very, very flattered when I heard he was going to do that.
Is that something that you see more and more of, like lines from your songs and things just popping up in odd places?
Yeah, occasionally. It always tickles me, and I've met a few people that I really admire through that. Sort of how I came to know Will Wheaton and how I came to know Neil Gaiman is by, noticing in the Google search for my name that I have running in the background all the time, that they had mentioned me on their blogs, and I was like, oh God, those people know who I am, and, I'm a huge fan of them. So the funny thing about everybody publishing what they think all the time on the internet is that, you can sort of find each other that way. And so, when Neil Gaiman came to one of my shows in Minneapolis, it was the friend of a friend who was working the merchandise table, knew him and knew that he was coming and let me know. And then, they sort of introduced us after the show, and it was one of those things like, I'm a huge fan of you. And it was like, no, I am a huge fan of you, sort of great. And I don't know if we would have even known about each other's mutual admiration if it weren't for the internet. So yeah, occasionally that happens, and it's always very flattering to know that a famous person is thinking about you.
Well, so like you mentioned Boing Boing, like what other blogs or things do you follow the most?
I used to read Slashdot like crazy, but I have found, I don't know if this is the changing nature of culture and media or just me, but I don't have the patience to make it through that feed anymore. It's just like it's like a fire hose, and if I miss it for a couple of days, I can't catch up. So I'm kind of a gadget hound, and I'm a Big Mac fan, not the Big Mac, the hamburger. I should say. So, I tend to keep up on that news. Let's see, Daring Fireball, I think is the greatest blog about Apple on the planet right now. It's really, I think, excellent analysis and finding of links to other excellent analysis of what Apple is doing and why. Waxy.org is Andy Bayo's link blog. Very, very short bits of cool things, links to cool things. I guess we share a sensibility because everything that he links to, I'm always really interested in. What else? The rest of it's sort of friends and fellow creative people. And the bulk of my online time reading about stuff tends to happen on Twitter these days, which again, another short burst of information easily consumed that I can do in between when I'm doing other things. So yeah, really, if it's longer than a couple of paragraphs, I don't have time for it.
You've been to the Penny Arcade Expo before and performed there, right? So what has your experience been like going to that and performing for that crowd?
It's really amazing. I mean, they really do such a great job running it, and it's this enormous group of people all interested in video games, and so the whole weekend is fantastic. But on top of that, they treat the musical acts like actual rock stars, and they have these big concerts in these giant rooms. And I think the Seattle one is like 5,000 or 6,000 people, and it's just huge and great, and it's by far the biggest audiences that I've ever played for. And yeah, PAX East is coming up in not this weekend but next weekend, and I'm really looking forward to that. It's the first time they're doing it on the East Coast. We'll see how it goes, but I'm sure it'll be fantastic.
Have you done any other sort of conventions like science fiction oriented or anything like that? Have you performed at Comic-Con or considered doing Worldcon or anything like that?
No, I haven't done Comic-Con. I haven't done DragonCon. There have been a couple of other cons that I've done when they've sort of fit into the schedule, but pretty quickly once I started touring, I just ran out of time. I don't like to be on the road too much because of my family, and so I need to be really brutal about saying no to things that don't fit into the schedule. Otherwise, I'd be away every weekend and I'd be miserable. And cons are one of those things that they're fun, but they're not. I mean, to me, I always prefer playing in a music venue. A place where there are audio professionals making it sound good and where the room is meant to have music played and people to listen to it. And cons are rarely in that sort of situation. So, the music is less enjoyable for me for that reason. I mean, it's often the audiences are great, or as good as, or even better than in a music club. But it's just a very different experience. And on top of that, a con lasts for an entire weekend usually, whereas a show is only one night, and I can do a few of those in a weekend, and it's just a much more efficient way for me to use my time. So I tend not to do a lot of cons lately, and mainly because they are things that are fun, and I don't have the luxury of doing fun weekends away anymore as much as I used to.
So do you have anything new that people should check out, and what should we look forward to seeing from you in the future?
The latest thing is really all the songs in the Rock Band Network, which I'm very excited about. I think there were 3 in the game of Rock Band already, and I just added another 4 to the Rock Band Network. So that's a total of 7, if I'm doing my math correctly. And I'm going to keep adding to that. So that's a very fun thing. Let's see. The only other thing prior to that was, oh God, it's been this is not so much a new product anymore, but there's of course my concert DVD, Best Concert Ever, which was a single concert filmed at great expense in the city of San Francisco, and that was actually a great show. It was a lot of fun. And then I don't know, it's been kind of a crazy 6 months for me. I moved and been working on the house, and all of that is kind of settling down. So I'm hoping to get it back to work now that the bulk of the touring in the beginning of this year has sort of subsided. I'm hoping to, I have quite a few song ideas, and I'm hoping to be able to sit down and hash out. So more stuff will come soon.
Okay, great. Well, Jonathan Coulton, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Jonathan Coulton for joining us on the show. So, so now we're going to talk about some music-related stuff. And I want to make it clear right off the bat that I do not in any way, shape, or form represent myself as a musical expert. And to maybe give you a sense of this, I'm going to relate a story from my childhood, which I had actually forgotten until, which I had managed to block out until just thinking about what I was going to talk about on this show. So when I was in 6th grade, our teacher took a poll of our class of what everyone's favorite band was. We were supposed to all vote for the most popular band. So one of the leading suggestions was Aerosmith. And so she went to write this on the board. And of course she wrote it ARROW Smith. And that was actually the first I had heard of Aerosmith. So when she wrote it like that, I was like, wow, cool. It's like some fantasy related thing. And then of course everyone in the class was like shrieking. They're like, that's not how you spell it. Oh my God, could our teacher be any more of a loser? You know, I'm just sitting there like, wow, I didn't know how to spell it either. and of course, once I realized it wasn't a fantasy thing, I just completely lost all interest. And then so it came down to I don't remember what the other band was, but it was Aerosmith versus some other band, and exactly half the class had voted for Aerosmith, and exactly half the class had voted for this other band, except me, and I hadn't voted because I'd never heard of any of these bands. And so the teacher's like, we have an odd number of students, but we have a tie. Someone must not have voted. You know, who didn't vote? And so I sort of had to admit that I hadn't voted. And everyone's like, hey, he doesn't even know who Aerosmith is. And so I ended up voting for Aerosmith just because, you know, I despised the kids who were voting for Aerosmith marginally less than I despised the kids who were voting for the other band.
Damn it, Dave, this is how democracy fails.
But yeah, I mean, I've just always, you know, been mostly into books and video games and movies and things. And I, you know, I like music just fine, but it's always been way down the list.
I remember when we first met and we were sort of getting to know each other and like what each other's into. I know I asked you like what sort of music you were in, and like you couldn't really answer the question. You know, it's like, well, who's your favorite band? Like, nah, I don't know. And it was just like, it was like pulling teeth to get you to actually admit to liking anything, I think, as I recall. I think later on you sort of pointed out that like you listen to certain songs. It's like you like certain songs, but you don't really like bands.
Yeah, like, you know, I've been to maybe a handful of concerts in my life if someone dragged me to it, but, you know, there are very few musical acts where I like more than 3 or 4 of their songs enough to actually want to go listen to them play all of their songs in a row. Mm-hmm. You know, like, there's a lot of stuff if you just want to fit in, you have to kind of pretend to like. And so sort of, you know, like rock music was kind of one of those things for me. You know, I think I told you, right, that I had finally decided that it was enough of a social liability that I was going to have to learn something about popular music. And so I actually just started watching MTV. You know, I had to find it on the TV. I didn't know what channel it was. And so I just started watching it. I was taking notes, you know, and just trying to learn what the different bands were and what their songs were and things. And so then I was buying CDs, you know, because everyone was like, hey, let me see your CD collection. I'm like, I don't have a CD, you know. And then essentially once I was out of college, you know, I just put it in a box and never looked at it again. But I had gotten really sick of buying CD, because, you know, it used to be, you know, you'd have to buy a CD and, you know, they cost $20 or $25 or something. And, you know, usually you would hear one good song on the radio and then you would buy the CD and that song would be on it. And then there would be like 8 or 9 other songs that weren't any good. Mm-hmm. And I just got really sick of spending all that money for one good song. And so I had basically given up completely on buying music. And then when iTunes came along, it was kind of nice because if there was a song I liked, I could just buy that one song. And, you know, I always felt guilty about downloading music, so I never did that.
It's so cute, Dave, the story that you're telling. It's like you're an alien trying to assimilate into human culture. It's like, oh, I must study this thing they call music to fit in.
But yeah, so a lot of the songs I listen to, I don't have any idea who the band is, you know. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I've been judged so harshly so much in my life by, you know, people are like, hey, who are some of your favorite bands? And I'll tell them, and they're like, you're an idiot. And yeah, so it's just like a subject I don't really want to get into, you know. But I don't know. Are you more normal than I am, or I mean, what was your experience?
I don't know if I'd say more normal. I mean, I definitely like music, but I mean, I don't like anything that's like really popular at all. I mean, I kind of started off from an early age. I mean, I actually liked music, I guess, my whole life. I mean, you know, I remember watching MTV when I was like 7 or 8 or something, and you know, I liked Billy Idol and Quiet Riot and stuff like that. So I'm a big metal fan now, and so I guess I kind of started even as a metal fan when I was a little kid. I mean, admittedly, Quiet Riot and Billy Idol isn't really hardcore metal or anything. It's sort of metal light, but you know, for a 7-year-old kid, that's pretty metal.
So how do you get into metal when you're 7 years old? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, you know, I can't explain it. I mean, you know, I don't even know how I ended up watching MTV, but, you know, Billy Idol used to be on MTV all the time, and, you know, I don't know, I liked a couple of his songs that they used to play over and over, and I don't remember how I got into Quiet Riot. I guess they may have also had a video that they played, but I know, like, Come On Feel the Noise, I think that was probably the one song that sort of got me into them. And honestly, I can't explain it. How a 7-year-old kid gets into metal, but I definitely listened to it at that age, and it took me a long time, like sort of really the course of my whole life to really develop the taste that I have now. But because now I listen to sort of death metal, and specifically I really dig like melodic death metal and folk metal. Also known as pagan metal. A lot of this stuff gets pretty geeky, so I think it's sort of a fitting topic for our show. But because a lot of this stuff sort of deals with fantasy topics and all that, but also just the fact that these guys are like so proficient at guitar and like some of the crazy stuff they can do, that's pretty geeky. You have to be like a huge sort of guitar geek to even get that proficient at guitar. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I always kind of thought that metal is kind of it's like one of the most challenging forms of music to appreciate, and like science fiction and fantasy is kind of one of the more challenging forms of literature to appreciate, in that both of them sort of require more out of the consumer to enjoy it. It's not just like SF fantasy isn't just like real life, and metal often has lyrics that are hard to understand or whatever, or it involves screaming and stuff, and so it's like it's more complex. And so I don't know. I think that's sort of one of the reasons why people who like one may sort of gravitate towards the other as well.
I actually, we've known each other very well for like 10 years or something, and I guess I don't even know if someone asks you what bands are your favorites, because I never have, because I just don't care.
Right.
But like if someone asks you what bands are your favorite, how do you answer that question?
Yeah, well, I really like this band In Flames and Dark Tranquillity and At the Gates. They're usually the top three that I would list. I like lots and lots of different bands. I have I haven't totaled up how many songs or bands I have, but I've got a huge library of music, and like unlike you, I actually do like bands and whole albums. Like, I'm a big album person. Like, the iTunes revolution is great for being able to buy one song and all that, but I never do that. I always buy the album. I like that the internet has made it possible to sample all this different stuff before you buy it, because the metal I listen to, like, I can't listen to it on the radio or anything. And the radio is like, it's like the worst. I can't stand listening to the radio. If I want to sample new stuff, there's no way for me to do it like without the internet, unless I just like sort of buy albums randomly based on reviews and like, music reviews. I can almost never tell anything about an album from a music review. If I'm lucky, I can tell what subgenre it is, and then, sort of get some inkling if maybe I will like it. But, at best, it's like, it's a total crapshoot whether I actually will like it or not. So, the internet sort of made that great. And like, that's one of the still remaining uses of MySpace. Everyone sort of abandoned MySpace as this wasteland of the internet, but it's still useful for bands because they always have those music players on there, and you can go listen to a couple other songs. And, I sample a lot of stuff that way.
And I've never heard of any of those bands that you mentioned. And right. I find it very frustrating when people ask me who my favorite authors are, and I tell them, and they've almost never heard of any of them, And it must be the same thing for you with music, right? How often do you meet someone even who you mention those bands and they've heard of them?
Right. Yeah. No. It almost never happens. There are some bands that are sort of more on the popular end of the spectrum, and I always find it surprising to figure out which bands actually are popular. But like, there's this one band, Mastodon, and they sort of have a lot of commercial crossover with sort of a more mainstream audience. And so I've met a number of people who actually know Mastodon. And there's another band, Lamb of God, who also, they're like really, really heavy. So I'm kind of surprised that they have that sort of mainstream appeal. But a lot of people who aren't necessarily metal fans sort of know them. And like both of those bands, for instance, ended up in rock bands. So that sort of gives you some idea that they've reached some sort of mainstream acceptance if they actually available in rock band.
Well, so you mentioned that they're kind of geeky in terms of their subject matter. Could you give us some examples of that?
Yeah, well, like Mastodon, for instance, their latest album, which is like really awesome, actually, and my favorite of theirs, I think. But it's called Crack the Sky, and it's a concept album. So like the whole album tells this one story, and it's just like this really bizarre, trippy, weird fantasy thing going on. I couldn't even explain the plot of it to you because I'm not, it's pretty weird and complex and doesn't really make a lot of sense, like sort of line by line. But so that's just like this whole weird fantasy thing going on there. And then, I mentioned folk metal and pagan metal. That is all basically like singing about pagan gods and Vikings and, that sort of mythology. So, I mean, there's actually a whole sub-genre called like Viking metal, which is like, just guys screaming about Vikings and shit, sorry, I didn't mean to swear. When you start talking about metal, it kind of makes you want to swear. But, there's a band called Amon Amarth, which is actually, if for the Tolkien fans out there, that's the Elvish name for Mount Doom or something. I mean, it's definitely another name for Mount Doom. I can't remember if it's Elvish or not, but so they're called Amon Amarth, and although they're named after Tolkien, they actually sing exclusively about Vikings. So, I mean, they're like one of the leading practitioners of this Viking metal. But then there's this other band called Elwaity, and like if you tried to spell it, like you'd never spell it right. I mean, speaking of Aerosmith, I mean, geez, you'd never spell this thing right. But I mean, they sing partially in English, but then partially they sing in ancient Gaulish, and I'm like, when I learned that, I was like, what? It's just like, why? I mean. But they play a hurdy-gurdy in the band. They have like the most metal-sounding flute I've ever seen, and so I mean, just that just seems really geeky in itself to me. I mean, with them, like I don't know, I've never really read the lyrics for their stuff so much, and I can't really understand what most of what they're saying, since a lot of it is in ancient Gaulish. So, but yeah, I mean, they so they're very geeky. But I mean, there's tons and tons of different ones that just sort of all over the spectrum, different types of geeky things.
Well, when I was talking about how when the teacher spelled Aerosmith as if they were like a blacksmith except making arrows, and it momentarily piqued my interest as if it might be some sort of fantasy thing. I mean, that just makes me think, I mean, what if there had been more sort of geeky music that I was exposed to when I was growing up, and might I have just taken more of an interest in music? Because, when you think about the subject matter of popular music, it's like 98% love songs, mostly somebody singing about how they mistreated their lover and now the person has probably justifiably left them and they want them back. And this just never really resonated with me particularly. And it sort of seems like if books were 98% romance novels, I probably wouldn't have had much interest in books, right? And
right, yeah.
I don't know. So I wonder now if maybe with people like Jonathan Coulton and just writing more about stuff I might be interested in, if there are sort of more geeky kids who are kind of taking an interest in music, because it's not just such a bland monoculture product that was sort of what was being served up when I was a child. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly one of the appeals of metal to me, is that it there's almost no metal love songs. So I mean, they tackle all these different the variety of subjects, and including a lot of actually sort of flat out fantasy topics. But yeah, I mean, I think you might be right about the the sort of rise of geek music. I mean, in addition to Jonathan Coulton, there's also bands like Tenacious D, features Jack Black as half the band. And when you have something like Tenacious D that it has all this sort of crossover with movies, and they had like a television show, and it's another gateway into getting people into it, So, like, I mean, for instance, I would have probably never listened to Tenacious D except that, I'd heard that the movie was really funny. And it is, actually. I mean, like, I definitely would encourage everyone who sort of likes any sort of geeky music, or even just likes a good comedy, to check out the movie. It's called Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny. But it's actually really, really funny. And, I mean, I wouldn't have even said that I was a big Jack Black fan before that, but, it made him grow on me a bit.
Because it does seem to me that maybe things are getting better now in terms of just kind of interesting subject matter for music. And it seems like things were better kind of back in the 60s, I guess. I mean, it seems like when I talk to people who are alive during the 60s that they just have this emotional connection to music that I certainly don't have, because it seems like the music was actually about something substantive and relevant and powerful. Like I do know one sort of bona fide rock star. This is Janis Ian, and she was, just really, really popular in the 60s, and, everyone I've talked to who was alive then, knows who she is. And I met her through, she's also kind of interested in science fiction and started writing science fiction, in the last 10 years or so. And so actually, when I went to one of the first World Cons I went to, I met her there because she was kind of hanging out with Mike Resnick, and I knew Mike Resnick because he had been one of my clarinet instructors. And so some of us met Janis, and she was just really, really nice. And she actually asked, I told her that a couple of my clarion buddies and I had this sort of email group where we were just trying to figure out how to be writers. And she asked if she could join us, could join this list, because she's like, because when it comes to writing, I'm new at this just like you are, and it was really cool having her. I mean, this list went on for years, and it was really cool having her on because she was new at writing, but she obviously had a lot of experience in entertainment and stuff, and gave us a lot of really good advice about how to deal with different situations and things. Mm-hmm. Like how to deal with fans. And I mean, not that I have any fans, but if I acquire some fans at some point, I'll know how to deal with them.
Right.
But she was saying, like once you get to a certain level of fame, that you're just people are constantly just asking you to listen to their stuff, Mm-hmm. And she said, like, the best way to handle this is just to say, well, send it to me and I'll listen to it if I get a chance. And then if you get a chance, and then it's true what you said. And if you get a chance, you can listen to it. And if not, it's just sort of a kind of polite, way to deal with people, mm-hmm. In person. So stuff like that was really useful. But, I mean, she had been on, she was on Johnny Carson when she was a teenager and had big hits. And like one of her songs, like I guess her first big song was Society's Child, which was mm-hmm. about an interracial relationship. And she was saying that, I was actually just reading that like a radio station in Atlanta was burned to the ground because they had played this song because it was so controversial at the time, and so like stuff like that where the music was really important and had a message to it and everything. And I compare that to like the music, that's been popular in my lifetime, where it's like, my milkshake brings all the boys to the yard or whatever, it's like, it doesn't have any kind of, social statements or anything.
I felt kind of bad. I had like no idea who Janis Ian was. Like, I mean, not when you mentioned her, but like, Mike Resnick did that anthology a couple of years ago called Stars. And it was sort of based on the songs of Janis Ian. And, so he got all these different science fiction writers who I guess were fans of hers. And, they all wrote songs, or they all wrote stories inspired by her songs. And when I saw that, I was just like, I had no idea who she was. And so, like, how you were saying how, you just didn't know any of these bands, like, in when you were in school, like, you didn't know Aerosmith and all that. I mean, I have huge gaps of my, sort of musical knowledge, too. Like, like Beatles Rock Band recently came out, and, I mean, I almost know nothing about the Beatles. I mean, like, obviously I know some of their bigger hits just because they're so sort of everywhere. You can't avoid having some knowledge of the Beatles. But, I mean, just my lack of Beatles knowledge is sort of staggering.
Yeah, I actually do I know the Beatles actually reasonably well because that was one of the things my parents listened to when I was growing up. But it was funny, there's this Stephen King story called The Raft that I read a long time ago that I really, really liked. And I went back and reread it. Well, I should say it's about some kids and they swim out to this raft and then there's a monster in the water and they can't leave the raft without being killed. And so they're kind of stuck on the raft and the creature just keeps swimming around and they don't know what to do. And so I'd read this story and I really liked this story. And then I went back and reread it, 5 years ago or something. And it struck me when I reread it that like half the story seems like it's quotes of rock lyrics, mm-hmm. From the 60s. And it just seems like, I can't imagine that I'll ever write a story that's half quotes of music that I've listened to.
Right. Well, for one thing, you have to be pretty rich to be able to even afford to do that because I guess every time you quote lyrics in a song, you actually have to pay for the rights to it, and they tend to be pretty pricey. But, I mean, Stephen King is, sort of famously really into music. I mean, he's even in some band, right? I mean...
he has a band called the Rock Bottom Remainders.
Right. And it's like sort of a super group made of other sort of literary stars, like Ridley Pearson is one of the members, and I don't remember who else is in it.
I think Amy Tan is in it, maybe?
That could be, I don't know. But, I mean, everybody who's in it, I believe, is sort of a big literary, or, a big writer, a sort of a famous writer. Mm-hmm. And actually, isn't Patrick Nielsen Hayden also in in sort of a band like that? I mean, not people as famous as in Stephen King's band, but I mean, it's all sort of publishing insiders or something like that.
I think that's right, but I couldn't tell you who was in it. But can you think of many sort of fantasy and science fiction? Because it seems like I've heard anyway that kind of in the 60s that there was a big crossover between science fiction and rock and roll. That rock and roll people were all reading science fiction, and the science fiction writers were hanging out with rock and roll people and stuff. I mean. Do you know much about this?
I know about the sort of various books and stories that I've read that are sort of obviously influenced by rock of that era. I mean, George Martin wrote a novel called The Armageddon Rag that's sort of must have been inspired by his love of music.
Yeah, well, actually, I was going to mention that one because I think he was actually a sort of rock journalist for a while.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so the protagonist is a rock journalist, and it's a really cool, interesting book, and it's very much about the 60s and, you know, what they meant for American society and stuff. And it posits that there was a rock band called the Nazgul, you know, named after the Tolkien characters, that was like as big as the Rolling Stones or whatever. And so that's kind of the center of the book. When it came out, I guess it was sort of did not sell well. I heard him say one time that he thought he had this really cool idea for a book that it was gonna, I don't remember the 3 things, but it was something along the lines of, he thought it would be a cool mix of horror and fantasy and rock and roll or something like that. And then when it didn't sell, he decided that maybe there had been too much horror for the fantasy fans and too much fantasy for the horror fans, and rock and roll fans don't read. But it's been re-released. I think maybe people now are more accepting of genre blending stuff like that. So yeah, if you're interested, you know, if you're into fantasy and horror and rock and roll, you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, you know, actually, one of the other people I was going to mention is Lucius Shepard. Like, apparently, you know, he was not sure what role he played in the music scene, but he was really involved with the sort of grunge scene as it was coming up in Seattle, you know, in the 90s. And you know, he's like really into music, like otherwise. Like, I mean, I've heard him talk about like black metal and stuff, and you know, he had this great novella in FNSF, I don't know, a couple of years ago now, called Stars Seen Through Stone. You know, sort of about this guy who discovers this like sort of great, you know, obscure musical act playing in this like little nothing town, and you know, all kind of fantasy stuff happens around in the story. But you know, obviously it's very informed by his knowledge of working with musical artists and stuff.
Yeah, I think Michael Moorcock maybe was also kind of in that. You know, they I think it was Tachyon just released a collection called The Best of Michael Moorcock, and I just started reading it, but one of the first few stories is called A Dead Singer. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of this roadie, and he's driving around in a van with this guy named Jimmy, and you know, and Jimmy we pick up as a musician who's kind of dropped out of the musical scene, and the protagonist is hoping that Jimmy's going to make a comeback one of these days, sort of once he gets his head together. And as the story goes on, you realize that Jimmy is Jimi Hendrix, or the ghost of Jimi Hendrix, or maybe this guy is just crazy. And it's really cool and really, really creepy.
Moorcock actually, he was very involved with music. You know, he actually wrote some songs for Blue Oyster Cult, and you know, they're sort of famous for "Don't Fear the Reaper," that song. And but you know, Moorcock wrote some of their songs, and I think they it sort of had something to do with his Elric character. Yeah, so you know, he was in this English rock band called Hawkwind, and or at least he was a sort of an occasional member. You know, so obviously he was heavily into music since he was actually in a band, and wrote songs for, you know, a famous band like Blue Oyster Cult.
But when I was talking about like Stephen King quoting lyrics and stuff, it was kind of making me think. I'm pretty sure this was Jonathan Lethem said this, but some author anyway said, you know, he had just made up a bunch of bands. You know, he had written a book that combined, you know, references to real bands to references to made up bands. Mm-hmm. And the interviewer asked him, well, why are there these made up bands just as background in the book? And he said, well, because I wanted there to be songs that the characters love, that the reader just takes it for granted are good songs, and that they sort of love in that transitive way too. Mm-hmm. But if you mention a real song, then the reader might say, oh, I know that song, I hate that song. Mm-hmm. Whereas a made-up band and a made-up song can be a sort of platonic ideal of a good song in a way that a real song, you know, just can't be.
Yeah, no, so I recently saw this movie, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. It's actually based on a book too, so I guess you know, there's a book as well. But in the you know, the movie's obviously about music. You know, it's got playlist in the title, but the characters sort of are looking for this. There's this band called, I think, Where's Fluffy, and they sort of do these like surprise shows, and they sort of leave clues throughout town or whatever. And so like they're sort of hunting around for the band the whole movie. And you know, obviously they're a fake band, so like, you know, you can't know if you would actually like them. And so like you sort of do like them by that same transitive property that Lethem was talking about, you know. And of course in the movie, like they can't actually ever show the concert because they're supposed to be this epically awesome band, but they don't actually exist. So like, how are you gonna have some fake band pull that off and actually seem awesome? So it was pretty cleverly done, I thought. And that was actually a much better movie than I was anticipating it would be. You know, 'cause it's sort of romantic comedy that, and I don't typically go for that sort of stuff that much, but I mean that was a pretty well done one.
Well, when Jonathan Coulton was talking about, you were asking him if he would ever write a novel or something, and he was saying, oh, well, that just seems like too much work. I just, I like writing songs. That sort of fits my attention span, sort of. That was making me think that, because I really like writing short stories, and whenever I tell somebody that I'm a writer, they say like, oh, so what's your novel about? And I'm like, oh, actually, I haven't written any novels yet. But I've written, like over 100 short stories, and they're kind of like, oh, like that's not even, that's like, oh, you're not a real writer, short stories. What are those?
If you think that's bad, try telling someone you edit anthologies and see the blank look that crosses their face. And
I'm kind of like, have you ever heard of? Well, probably not. Well, have you ever heard of Poe or? I was going to say Lovecraft, but they probably haven't ever heard of him. But or like, ever heard of Sherlock Holmes? I mean, those were short stories,
Right.
Those were, legitimate writer projects. But I kind of, I'm kind of envious in a way of songwriters where, you write songs and they're 3 minutes long or whatever, and you tell people, oh, I'm a songwriter, and they say, oh, that's cool. And they don't say, oh, so when are you going to write an opera?
yeah, right.
I mean, they understand like, oh, well, operas are cool and everything, but maybe I don't want to write an opera. Maybe I just like writing songs.
Yeah, and one of the sort of unique properties of music, I think that it has an advantage over prose is that also, like, if you really like a song, like you might listen to it like over and over and over. I mean, it's always hard to tell like how many times you've listened to a song in the past, but like iTunes now, it actually tracks the play count, and it'll actually track it from all your different iPods and your plays on the computer, so it'll actually sync all that stuff up. So, I mean, I can actually look at my playlists and see that, oh, well, I've listened to this song like 100 times already, And I mean, that's actually quite a lot, given that, like, I have a playlist of like, 200 songs or something that I sort of go through. Before listening to the same song over and over, I will have listened to the whole playlist. And so, if I've listened to something 100 times, obviously it's stayed in my playlist for quite a while other stuff has rotated in and out. But, like, I mean, I've never read any short story or novel 100 times, certainly. I mean, there are probably people who have, we have friends that have like sort of read Lord of the Rings like every year. And I mean, even that, then what, she made me read it like this, like, our friend Andrea, like, she's maybe read it 20 times or something. I mean, you'd have to read it several times a year to catch up with the pace of a song.
But it seems to me the big advantage that music has over prose fiction is that it can become popular a lot faster, it seems like, because, you can listen to it, it doesn't require much of an investment on the part of the audience to listen to a song, You can just hear something on the radio and you're not even paying attention, and you're like, oh, hey, I like that.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't just, oh, I wasn't really paying any attention to that short story, but I like it,
Right. Yeah, I mean, reading is much more of an active sort of form of entertainment, and that's always been one of its challenges to, reaching any sort of mainstream acceptance. Just on comparing it to something like watching movies or television. Like, for instance, on television, having millions and millions of fans who tune in every week, that might not be good enough, And there's like shows that get canceled all the time, and they only have millions and millions of fans. Whereas like any book or story that has millions of fans, that would be epically awesome. And like you could hardly believe your success at that point, so.
But it seems like, so it takes a lot longer for books to become popular,
right.
if they ever do. And so one of the sort of sad things is that, usually or often the author is dead by the time the book becomes really, really popular, so you see a lot of really young musical stars, you'll have like what's her name? Hannah Montana.
Oh, yeah. Miley Cyrus.
That's actually Miley Cyrus, and it's really rare to have a 16-year-old writer who's really popular.
Right.
Like that, because, not only is it a lot harder to write a novel than to sing a song that somebody else wrote for you, but, just by the time anyone's sort of a critical mass of people who have read it,
Of course, then you have exceptions like Christopher Paolini, who, did write a novel when he was like 15 or 16 or whatever, and it was hugely popular. And I guess it's still very popular now.
Yeah, but even he wasn't even like 20 or so by the time it actually was published. And
Yeah, I don't remember how old he was
got
when
a
he was published.
really sort of high profile and stuff. I mean, everyone sort of remembers that he wrote it when he was 16 or whatever, but he wasn't still that young.
Yeah.
When people started really hearing about it.
Yeah, there's another. I mean, there's actually quite a few writers like this who are very young when they had things published. I mean, you know, most of them have not achieved this level of success as Christopher Paolini. I mean, obviously, I would think almost everybody who's listening to this will have heard of him. You know, I mean, partially because it also was made in, you know, the first book, Aragon, was also made into a movie, so that helped. But you know, there's another writer named Amelia Atwater Rhodes who she published her first novel when she was 14, or she wrote it when she was 14. But I mean, it was out like when she was still a teenager, certainly. And I mean, she's still only like in her early 20s or something, I guess. But she's written several novels since then. So I mean, it always baffles me though. It's like, you know, how does that even get into the right hands to get published? You know, if you have something that was written at that age, you know.
Well, like in Christopher Paolini's case, it helps if your parents run a small press, you know.
Right.
But still, I mean, most authors, you know, it's funny how old you can be and still be considered a new young writer.
Yeah, right.
You know, like nobody would consider someone who was 40 a new young musical star.
Right.
But you know, people consider people who are 40 a new young writer all the time.
Yeah.
So I sort of wonder, you know, being a writer, I mean, I do kind of look with envy on the sort of mass hysteria, like that the Beatles you get, you know, and I guess there's some of this to some extent, like maybe J.K. Rowling, you know, or Neil Gaiman, I guess. But I mean, most writers, even like really popular writers, you know, don't have, you know, people like throwing their underwear at them.
Yeah.
Whereas even pretty mediocre bands do.
Right.
You know, and so I wonder, you know, like, I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years or something. I have yet to have anyone throw their underwear at me. And
be careful what you wish for.
And so I just wonder, I mean, is that an immutable fact that musicians have screaming fans like that and writers generally don't, or could the culture ever change?
Yeah, I don't know. It really is very strange, isn't it? I mean, because, you know, I mean, I was just at a concert recently, and, you know, it was this group of metal bands, 3 different metal bands playing, you know, mostly, you know, folks will not have heard of them. But, you know, I mean, any concert like that you go to, I mean, everybody that's there is like, you know, so into it. And like, you know, everybody's jumping up and down and you know, banging their heads. And there's people like in the mosh pit going crazy and stuff. And it's like, you know, could you ever imagine inspiring that kind of reaction by reading a short story or something? You know, I mean, the thing is, like, we can love something equally. Like, I mean, I could love literature and I can love short stories. I can love The Stars My Destination as much as I love any of the music I listen to. But it's just not going to, you know, sort of inspire that kind of reaction, you know, and I wonder why that is. I mean, I guess it's it's just something sort of hardwired into people that, you know, like we respond to music in this, you know, sort of different way, you know. I mean, I guess because you can sort of feel the beat and that kind of stuff, but I don't know, it has something that, I mean, because all throughout human history, I mean, you know, people have sort of treated music in this different way, you know, incorporating it into sort of tribal rituals and whatnot. So I don't know, it's kind of an unusual relationship we have with music.
So recently, you know, I was talking to John and I said, you know, do you know this thing Pandora Radio? Mm-hmm. And he's like, oh my God, you're so lame. And I had flashbacks to 6th grade. And then I had to confess, actually, my mom had told me about this. But yeah, if anyone is as lame as me and doesn't know what it is, it's like this website you go to and you give it a song that you like, and it just starts playing kind of a custom-made radio station for you with songs that are similar to that song, which is really cool. And so actually, I was thinking I would really like it if someone would make something like this for short stories. John and I were talking about this a little bit, but you know, you would give it a short story that you like, and it would just pop up, you know, or maybe even like sort of in podcast format that, you know, say you commuted to work every morning, and so you would give it a short story you liked, and it would give you a story that you could listen to on your commute, and then you would come home at the end of the day and tell it, you know, whether or not you liked that story, and it would sort of customize it to your tastes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be really cool. Although, you know, it's funny. one of the ways Pandora analyzes music is it analyzes it on some sort of structural level where, because like if you ask it like, well, why did you recommend this to me? It has some sort of like nonsensical sounding explanations, like like if you're a music geek or whatever, maybe it makes sense to you, but like to a normal person like me or like a lay person, it doesn't make any sense. But it sort of talks about like syncopation and all kind of stuff, and it's like, okay, well, fine, whatever. But it would be really interesting if they could develop sort of an algorithm to do that with short stories, where it's not just relying on peer feedback by saying, okay, well, people who like this also like this. If it could actually analyze the structure of a story or something and somehow make a recommendation based on that, now that would be something. No, but so I mean, Pandora is great. I mean, I actually even if you like sort of obscure stuff like I do, I mean, and if there's any hardcore metal fans out there, a lot of them will probably be like, oh man, what you like isn't obscure. Like, I know this stuff from like the 80s, man, that like you can only get on vinyl, and you can only get it by trading with somebody, and I mean, because like if you read any metal reviews, it's like they're full of that. They're like all full of sort of making references to bands I've never heard of, and like they're comparing it to some band, or they're saying that this band that I've never heard of did this same thing so much better like 20 years ago, and I'm like, okay, this doesn't help me. But yeah, so Pandora actually, it does great for sort of all types of music, and I found a lot of stuff that I like because of that. And Last FM is kind of a similar thing where you can sort of it can build a radio station for you sort of based on like one song, and the libraries of both of these things are quite extensive. So I mean, you can discover a lot of new stuff. Just if you really like a particular band, you can discover a lot of stuff that's sort of similar to it, and I find it very valuable.
The only thing I wanted to mention that we haven't gotten to is I just wanted to. There's an artist called MC Chris I really like, who writes a lot of sort of geeky kinds of music. The first song of his I heard is called Fett's Vet, and it's written from the point of view of Boba Fett from Star Wars, and it's very catchy and crude. Mm-hmm. He also has a song called Nerd Girl, where girl was spelled GRRL.
Well, the name of that artist just reminded me that there's a guy named MC Frontalot who we should certainly mention. I mean, he's sort of he's the pioneer of what they call nerdcore rap, and there's actually a really good documentary called Nerdcore Rising, which like if you've never listened to MC Frontalot and you're kind of curious about him, you can check that out. It's on you can stream it for free on Netflix if you're a Netflix subscriber. Otherwise, I would just we should have mentioned Death Clock Metalocalypse, or however the hell you say that. It's like Metal Apocalypse and combined into one word. But it's this cartoon that runs on Cartoon Network, and it's about a fake metal band called Death Clock, which has like supernatural powers to some degree, and they have legions of fans. They're much more popular than any death metal band would ever be in real life, obviously. But it's certainly very geeky and so relevant to this topic. But and otherwise, if you're just sort of a geek and you're interested in documentaries, there's a good one on metal called Metal: A Headbanger's Journey, and it's sort of like an anthropological look at metal fans and the evolution of metal. So like even if you're kind of curious about a subculture, in this case metal, it's really interesting. And those are always the kind of documentaries I really enjoy, are ones that explore different subcultures. And in this case, I was already intimately familiar with it, but it's interesting if you don't know anything about it.
And that was our show. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. If you'd like to share your thoughts about any of the topics we discussed today, we'd love to hear from you. Just go to tor.com and click on podcasts, and then Geek's Guide to the Galaxy episode 16, and post a comment there. And be sure to join us next week when we'll interview Naomi Novik, author of the Temeraire series about a fantasy version of the Napoleonic Wars in which dragons are real. The series has been optioned by none other than Peter Jackson, director of Lord of the Rings. See you then.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Tor.com. For this episode's show notes or to subscribe to this podcast, visit Tor.com and click on Podcasts. For more information about your hosts, visit JohnJosephAdams.com or DavidBarrCurrently.com. Music and voiceover produced by Deadsville 9 Entertainment. If you've enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.